In 1830, Mexico was still reeling from the effects of its hard-won independence, achieved in 1821 after over a decade of violent struggle against Spanish rule. The nation, as seen on maps from that era, covered a vast expanse much larger than the present-day country. This sprawling territory ranked among the largest nations of the time. However, the aftermath of 11 years of warfare left the new republic in a state of disarray. The revolutionaries had not set forth any concrete strategies or frameworks for governance, leading to fierce internal power struggles. Mexico, with roughly 4.5 million square kilometers to manage, faced a severe financial crisis and lacked the resources to organize itself effectively. The country was threatened both by internal uprisings and by the possibility of another Spanish invasion from nearby Cuba. The government was marked by instability and was unprepared for the kind of international conflict that would erupt with the United States less than 20 years later in 1846. Meanwhile, the United States was in a period of territorial growth, having expanded considerably since its own independence. The U.S. pushed further into lands inhabited by Native Americans and had acquired the immense Louisiana Territory from France. Even with this growth, Americans saw opportunities for further expansion. Mexico's internal turmoil led to a number of regional revolts and attempts at secession. In 1836, Texas successfully broke away from Mexico. The United States initially refused to admit Texas as a state, mainly due to opposition from northern politicians who did not want to add another slave state to the Union. At the same time, Mexico encouraged raids along the border and warned that any move to annex Texas would be considered an act of war, as it still regarded Texas as its own. Nevertheless, following the 1844 election of President James K. Polk, who ran on a platform of reclaiming Texas and occupying the Oregon Territory, the United States moved quickly to annex Texas. Polk was also interested in acquiring California, New Mexico, and the rest of what is now the American Southwest. Polk attempted to buy these territories, but Mexico refused his offer. Soon after, he escalated tensions by sending American troops into the contested area between the Rio Grande and Nueces River, a region both nations had previously recognized as part of the Mexican state of Coahuila. Disputes over this land intensified. Texas was officially annexed by the United States on December 29, 1845, becoming the 28th state. However, this annexation brought with it unresolved disputes over Texas's southern and western boundaries. Mexico did not acknowledge Texas's independence or the U.S. offers to purchase the disputed lands. As a result, the situation between the two nations rapidly deteriorated into open conflict. On April 25, 1846, Mexican cavalry attacked a detachment of U.S. troops under General Zachary Taylor in the disputed zone, resulting in about a dozen American casualties. Following this, Mexican forces besieged an American fort on the Rio Grande. Taylor called for reinforcements and soon won victories at the battles of Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma. After these engagements, President Polk reported to Congress that the cup of forbearance had been exhausted even before Mexico passed the boundary of the United States, invaded our territory, and shed American blood upon American soil. Congress declared war on May 13th, although Mexico never issued a formal declaration. The origins of the conflict remain contentious. Mexico, weakened by internal strife, faced a rapidly expanding United States. While the U.S. did not want to appear as an aggressor, some, like Ulysses S. Grant, who served as a young officer in Taylor's army but later criticized the war, believed that the U.S. military's advance from the Nueces to the Rio Grande was intended to provoke hostilities without firing the first shot, thereby minimizing domestic opposition to war. After gaining independence, Mexico saw the rise of Antonio López de Santa Anna, a figure whose loyalties shifted repeatedly. Initially, he did not support independence from Spain, but later fought for it. He backed the monarchy, then rebelled against the emperor and ultimately supported a republican government. Mexico's search for stability was hampered by these upheavals, which only deepened its vulnerabilities. Santa Anna would go on to serve as president 12 times over a span of 22 years. Following the U.S. declaration of war in 1846, an internal coalition, including ousted President Mariano Paredes, sought to restore a federal republic under Santa Anna's leadership. Santa Anna sent correspondence to Mexico City, expressing that he had no intention of reclaiming the presidency, but wished to leave his exile in Cuba and offer his military expertise to help Mexico recover Texas. President Valentin Gómez Farías, feeling increasingly desperate, agreed to Santa Anna's proposal and permitted his return. However, what Farías did not realize was that Santa Anna had been secretly negotiating with American officials, offering to transfer all disputed lands to the United States for a fair price, provided he was granted safe passage through the U.S. naval blockade. Upon his return, Santa Anna assumed command of the Mexican army. Once he regained influence, he broke his earlier promises, proclaimed himself president, and began organizing resistance against the advancing American forces. The U.S. military secured victories at the battles of Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma. General Stephen Watts Kearny, leading his troops, advanced into the contested areas and New Mexico. When Kearny's force arrived on August 15th, they encountered no opposition from Mexican troops and entered Santa Fe, asserting control over New Mexico for the United States without engaging in battle. On August 18th, Kearny declared himself military governor of the territory and set up a civilian administration, instituting a provisional legal code now known as the Kearny Code. He departed for California on September 25, 1846. Following the capture of New Mexico, elements of Kearny's Army of the West, led by Alexander Doniphan, moved south into present-day northwestern Mexico, embarking on a lengthy campaign. Meanwhile, resistance erupted in the form of the Taos Revolt, but U.S. forces responded swiftly to suppress it. Naval operations were also underway. Commodore John D. Sloat, commanding the U.S. Navy's Pacific Squadron, had orders to seize San Francisco Bay and blockade California ports. Captain John C. Fremont, leading a topographical survey, entered the Sacramento Valley in late 1845. Upon learning that war was imminent, Fremont returned to California. Sloat directed Fremont to bring 160 volunteers to Monterey, joining the California Battalion. On July 15th, Sloat handed over command to Commodore Robert F. Stockton, who took a more aggressive approach. Facing little resistance, Stockton's forces entered Los Angeles on August 13th, as General Castro and Governor Pio Pico fled to Sonora. Stockton reported to Washington that California was now free from Mexican rule. Meanwhile, Kearny's march continued across New Mexico and the Sonoran Desert, reaching the Colorado River in late November 1846. On December 7th, General Andres Pico's 100 Lancers engaged Kearny's force of about 150 at the Battle of San Pascual. Despite being wounded, Kearny maintained his position until reinforced by a relief column. Kearny then led a 600-man force on a 150-mile march to Los Angeles. On January 8, 1847, the combined Stockton-Kearny Army defeated Mexican troops at the Battle of Rio San Gabriel. The subsequent signing of the Treaty of Cahuenga ended organized resistance in California. Elsewhere, the Mexican Army's defeats at Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma deepened the political crisis in Mexico. General Zachary Taylor led 2,300 U.S. troops across the Rio Grande, advancing southward. The intense Battle of Monterey resulted in heavy casualties for both sides. Mexican troops under General Pedro de Ampudia managed to repel Taylor's best soldiers, who, unfamiliar with urban combat, were caught off guard by concealed defenders. Despite this, Taylor negotiated an 8-week truce, allowing the Mexican army to withdraw in exchange for surrendering the city. Pressured by the U.S. government, Taylor later broke the truce and occupied Saltillo. On February 22, 1847, Santa Anna personally led 20,000 troops north to confront Taylor. The Americans, numbering 4,600, fortified themselves at Buena Vista Pass. The Mexican army, reduced to 15,000 by desertion and exhaustion, still outnumbered the Americans. Santa Anna demanded their surrender, but was refused and launched an attack the next day. He attempted to outmaneuver the U.S. positions by sending cavalry and infantry up the steep slopes flanking the pass, while directing a frontal assault along the main road to Buena Vista. During the Battle of Buena Vista, the Mexican forces, despite their numerical advantage, managed to breach the American lines at several points. However, they suffered substantial losses due to the effective use of American horse artillery, which played a decisive role in halting their advances. Initial accounts of the battle, along with some propagandist reports, claimed a Mexican victory. Nevertheless, instead of pressing the attack the following day, Santa Anna chose to withdraw his troops during the night, prompted by news of unrest and rebellion in Mexico City. Many military historians believe that had the Mexicans launched a final assault, the U.S. Army might have been defeated. A crucial factor in the United States' success during the war was its ability to establish naval dominance along Mexico's coastlines. The U.S. Navy's blockade and control of key ports, particularly Veracruz, ensured a steady flow of troops and supplies to American forces. Even before open conflict began in the north, the U.S. had already implemented a blockade. Rather than reinforcing General Taylor for a continued push, President Polk dispatched a Second Army under General Winfield Scott. Scott's force was transported by sea to Veracruz, where, on March 9, 1847, he executed the first large-scale amphibious landing in U.S. military history to begin the siege of Veracruz. Despite the city's defensive efforts, the superior American numbers led to its surrender. Scott then advanced toward Mexico City with nearly 9,000 troops, beginning on April 2, 1847. Santa Anna set up defenses at Cerro Gordo, about 50 miles northwest of Veracruz, entrenching 12,000 troops and artillery along the main road. However, Scott's cavalry arrived early, exposing the Mexican positions and initiating the Battle of Cerro Gordo. The Americans prevailed and continued their march, despite ongoing harassment from guerrilla fighters. Scott's army pressed on to Mexico City, engaging in a series of battles around the city's defenses. After victories at Contreras and Churubusco, peace talks began but failed on September 6, 1847. Further battles at Molino del Rey and Chapultepec, followed by the storming of the city gates, led to the occupation of the capital. Scott became the military governor of Mexico City, and his campaign victories made him a celebrated figure in the United States. The Mexican army was plagued by desertion, with many soldiers lacking loyalty to their commanders and suffering from poor conditions, inadequate training, and insufficient pay. This undermined their effectiveness on the battlefield. With the U.S. having advanced deep into Mexican territory, the question arose whether to annex the entire country. However, concerns over cultural differences, logistical overreach, and potential instability led to opposition to full annexation. Instead, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo granted the U.S. control over Texas, Alta California, and Nuevo Mexico territories that would later be organized into several states. In exchange, Mexico received $15 million, a sum much lower than previous American offers and equivalent to about $443 million today. These lands were sparsely populated, likely contributing to the low price. The U.S. ultimately gained over 900,000 square miles of territory. The later Gadsden Purchase further adjusted the border, establishing the present-day boundary between the two countries. Thank you for watching, subscribe, like, and share. See you in our next video.